Hi, and welcome to another Human Resources Management training session. So over the past several months, we've been looking at various areas of employment law, usually legislated areas such as minimum rates of pay, overtime, award conditions, and things like that. Today we're going to look at something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at more an issue that you need to be aware of, or a series of issues that you need to be aware of in the current workplace climate, things that are becoming more prevalent as time goes on. So we're going to be looking at social media, internet and email monitoring, and also surveillance in the workplace, and some of the things you need to be aware of, and maybe some of the policies that you need to have in place if you want to use areas such as this. So firstly, we're going to look at social media. Now, this is an area that is developing so quickly that often people who legislate about employment law, we can't really keep up with it. It's changing too quickly for us to be able to maintain up-to-date legislation about it. So really, where it really comes down to is the policies of the business. Now, what we're first going to do is look at a few different areas in the media that have come up recently about people that have been terminated for things they put on social media. So firstly, let's look at the case of a hairdresser called Ann Fitzgerald. Now, this is as an article that we got from the Australian from a couple of years ago. Now, this was a Melbourne hairdresser who was sacked by her employer for comments that she'd made on Facebook. They were slightly critical of the business. She was sacked for this, among a few other areas, and then reinstated after she made an unfair dismissal claim. Now, the thing that we have to look at there is what was actually said by Ann. Her actual comments didn't name the business, and they weren't specifically critical of the employer. They were more of a general workplace gripe. They were more of a gripe about the industry that she worked in. So this was not considered to be strong enough grounds to terminate her fairly, instantly dismissing her and not giving her notice or a chance to change her conduct on the website. Another area, a more recent one, is the transport company Fox. Now, they also fired someone for something that they said on Facebook. Once again, that employee made a claim with the Fair Work Commission for unfair dismissal, and they were reinstated. Now, in this particular case, they made specifically critical comments about their manager and made slightly, I suppose, poor taste comments about an Islamic co-worker and also of a female co-worker. Now, you would think that that would be pretty clear-cut, that that would be fair grounds to terminate someone. But in their ruling, it was actually ruled, and I've highlighted a bit of the article here, in making its decision last year, Fair Work Australia found that the company did not have a social media policy, and its induction training materials were inadequate grounds to sack the employee. What that essentially means is that because the business in question didn't have any policies regarding use of social media outside of work, there was actually no grounds to make that dismissal because the employee hadn't technically breached any of the workplace legislation. Now, what's interesting about this is the other thing that was taken into account was the age of the employee. The employee was actually quite old and didn't understand, or claimed not to understand anyway, exactly how social media works. That defense did work in this case, but the commissioner who made the decision did actually say that's not going to be an excuse for much longer because social media is now becoming such a part of our everyday lives that people have no real excuse for not understanding how it works or things like that. So as I say, this is a forever developing area of employment law, and it's changing the way that we look at the employment relationship. It was much clearer in previous years that the line between someone's at-work conduct and their conduct away from the workplace were separate. Someone's conduct outside the workplace, as long as it didn't affect their business, generally could not be taken into account when deciding whether to terminate someone. Now that this information is becoming very public and very easily accessible, that is changing slightly, and I think we'll see more and more developments as that kind of goes on. The other area to look at is electronic surveillance in the workplace. Now, this can take on a number of areas. That can be actually physically observing someone, so with a camera or something like that, or surveying the use of computers, the use of workplace resources. Now, let's first look at the concept of having, say, a camera in the workplace. This doesn't technically come under employment law legislation. It comes under an act called the Privacy Act. Now, what an employer has to be very careful of is not breaching the Privacy Act. Generally, it comes down to, it's a fairly common sense approach. An employer cannot record someone's private conversation or private activity. And the definition of that is basically something that someone could reasonably expect would not be observed. So if you've got a camera in a fairly public place while someone is doing their work, maybe they couldn't argue that that's a private place. But if it's in somewhere like a changing room or something like that, that would be breaching the legislation. An example of this would be, say, at my workplace. We have some money for the social club in our workplace kitchen. There's a camera in that room. There's a sign saying that there's a camera, so everyone knows that that's being recorded. It's considered to be a reasonable practice to have that being recorded. However, if that wasn't being, if it wasn't made clear to us that there was that area being recorded, we might think that our behavior or our conversations there were private. So it's just kind of, I guess, striking that balance. And the same with use of email and internet. Really, it's very, very important to have a clear-cut policy on this use in terms of what is acceptable use of business resources. So, for example, what sites it's okay for an employee to visit, and also what is reasonable use of the workplace email. Can they use it for personal emails in any regards, or is it solely something that can be used for work? And obviously with areas like internet and email, there is at least a record of that, which is very important for employers to be able to access that information. For example, it's also very important that if you're going to monitor that specifically, rather than just checking on it every now and then, it's very important that the employee knows that all their use of the work computer, whether that's email or internet use, is monitored by management, and it could be used as some kind of disciplinary action if they are to breach those policies. But again, it's really, really important to have those policies, to have clear-cut policies that all the employees are aware of, because ultimately that's what's going to be looked at if someone is terminated based on those reasons. So yeah, that basically comes to the options that you have as an employer when it comes to areas like this. As I said before, it's really important to realize that legislation isn't really in place for areas like email use, internet use, and social media use. So it really does come down to the policies of the business. One particular option is that you block those websites. That's what happens at Commerce, for example. We block Facebook, we block Twitter, we block MySpace, and therefore no one can be tempted to use it during their workday because it's not an option that's available to them. You may also just wish to mention that in your policies or your contract that you give your employee, to set out the websites that it's not appropriate for an employee to use, and that could be something that you would want to do. That's generally the way that you can deal with it, because as I say, there is no real legislation that exists at the moment governing what appropriate use of the internet or email is in the workplace. Alright guys, that basically covers it for modern issues in the workplace. Now I'm going to go through some of the services and templates that we offer. We can offer private consultations for businesses, so if you would like to call WageLine and ask to have an education officer contact you about any specific areas in your business, then that is something that you can definitely organise. We offer seminars for businesses. Now, obviously we offer them in the metropolitan area, but we've also got a series of regional seminars coming up, and I'll go into a bit more detail about them in just a second. There's also a subscription service, which means that you can subscribe to WageLine, and then any changes to legislation, any changes to the minimum rate of pay, anything like that, once it happens, you will receive an email notification, and you'll be able to keep up to date with any changes in legislation. And of course, WageLine, our call center, which again I will plug a bit more in just a second. All right, so now I want to talk a bit about the regional seminars that are coming up from the department. If we could just get that up on the screen, we've got seminars coming up in Broome, Derby, Albany, and Bunbury. So if you're in any of those areas, I really, really encourage you to go to our website, which is www.commerce.wa.gov.au. Go to the Labour Relations tab and look for services, and that will list all these particular seminars. So if you're in Broome, Derby, Albany, or Bunbury, please do check that out, and you can contact one of our officers, book yourself in for one of those seminars, because they can be very, very useful. And they'll be then you'll be able to obviously meet up with an education officer and have a face-to-face chat with them about any issues that are of concern to you. All right, that basically does it for today's session. One final plug for WageLine. WageLine is the free, confidential, and unbiased service that you can access if you've got any queries about employment law. So anything that I've talked about today or in any of the previous seminars that we've dealt with, you can call WageLine and get some advice on exactly where you stand with that. And finally, my quick disclaimer, you should always seek specific professional advice before acting or not acting in the information contained in this presentation, because it is a general overview only. All right, well that about does it for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.